The tension builds. The arena was silent, the air thick with anticipation. In the center stood the apex predator, the mightiest creature in the known world. His massive form towered over everyone, his muscles rippling with power. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the crowd as they watched in awe. He had never been defeated. The very thought of his downfall was unthinkable. He was the king, the ruler of all, and no one dared challenge him. His reputation was built on fear and respect. He was untouchable. Across from him stood the human girl. She was small, almost fragile compared to the predator, but her eyes held a fire that burned with determination. She had no armor, no weapons, only her wits and her will to survive. The crowd whispered among themselves, unsure of what to expect. How could she, a mere human, stand a chance against the apex of all creatures? It seemed impossible, and yet she was there, ready for the fight of her life. The apex predator stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the arena. His every movement was a testament to his power. The girl remained still, watching him closely, every muscle tensed in preparation. She knew the odds were stacked against her. He was faster, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. But she had something he didn't: her mind. She had been trained not for physical strength, but for outsmarting those who underestimated her. With a sudden roar, the apex predator lunged forward. The crowd gasped. The force behind his strike was immense, like a storm crashing into the ground. The girl barely had time to react. She was quick, but he was faster. His massive hand shot out, slapping her across the face with such force that the impact reverberated throughout the arena. The crowd gasped again, their eyes wide with disbelief. The predator stood tall, expecting the human girl to crumple to the ground. He had struck many opponents before, and they all fell. But the girl didn't fall. She staggered, her cheek stinging from the blow, but she remained standing. For a moment there was silence. The girl wiped the blood from her lips and stood, upright, her back straight. She looked up at the apex predator, her eyes filled with something the predator hadn't expected: defiance. It was as though the slap hadn't just hurt her, it had fueled her. The crowd held its breath. What was this? A human girl, standing before the most powerful creature alive, and not backing down. The apex predator narrowed his eyes, a flicker of doubt crossing his expression. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The predator had assumed that with one strike the girl would be finished. But she wasn't. She was still there, staring him down, challenging him in a way no one ever had before. The tension in the arena grew. The crowd waited, unsure of what would happen next. Would the girl crumble under the weight of the predator's power, or was something else at play here? The battle had only just begun, but already it felt like the rules were changing. And then, in the quiet that followed, the girl took a step forward, her eyes never leaving the predator. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she was ready. Ready to prove that even the most powerful creature could be beaten. She had nothing to lose, and that made her the most dangerous opponent of all. The human's unlikely resistance. The apex predator stood tall, his chest heaving with the satisfaction of his strike. He had knocked the girl off her feet before, and surely this time would be no different. The crowd, still recovering from the shock of her survival, watched in stunned silence. They had expected the human girl to fall, to surrender, but she remained standing. It was almost as if she had been waiting for this moment. And for the first time, doubt crept into the mind of the predator. The girl's cheek still burned from the slap, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she focused, narrowing her eyes on the apex predator. He was strong, but she had something he didn't. She understood the power of the mind. She knew how to read her opponent, how to anticipate his next move before he made it. The predator relied on brute force, she would rely on strategy. With a swift motion, the human girl darted forward. Her movement was quick and unexpected. The predator was ready to crush her, but she was already 2 steps ahead. He swung his massive arm, but she ducked just in time, her body moving like water, flowing around his attack. She was small, But her agility gave her an edge, something the predator hadn't anticipated. For a moment, there was silence again. The predator paused, a look of surprise on his face. This human, this girl, had dodged his strike, something no one had ever done before. The crowd gasped, and for the first time they could see that this wasn't going to be an easy fight. The apex predator snarled, his pride wounded. He was the ultimate warrior, a creature of strength and dominance. But now he was facing a human, who seemed to be more than just a helpless opponent. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time he realized something. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting to win. The girl took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't match the predator in strength, but she didn't need to. Her advantage lay in her ability to think, to outmaneuver him in ways he hadn't prepared for. She spotted a weak spot in his defense, a slight hesitation in his movements whenever he launched an attack. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. With a burst of speed, she made her move. She dodged another powerful blow, and instead of retreating, she launched herself toward the predator's side. She struck with precision, a quick jab to his ribs that made him stagger back. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him hesitate. The crowd roared with excitement, and the predator growled, more angry than ever. He could feel the pressure building. The human girl wasn't just surviving, she was testing him. The girl's blows were small, but they were strategic, each one chipping away at his confidence. The predator wasn't used to feeling vulnerable, but in this moment, he did. The tension in the arena thickened. The girl had proven something crucial. She wasn't just here to fight, she was here to win. And that realization sent a ripple of uncertainty through the predator's mind. Could he really be defeated by a mere human? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. The battle was no longer one-sided. With every move the girl made, the predator's confidence cracked just a little bit more. She had stepped into his world, and now, the rules of the game were changing. A battle of wills, the apex predator, still reeling from the unexpected resistance, began to feel something he hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. The human girl wasn't backing down. Each strike, each dodge, she seemed to predict his next move. She wasn't relying on brute force like every other challenger before her. She was using something far more dangerous. Her mind. It was a battle not just of strength, but of will. The predator's instinct screamed at him to crush her, to end the fight with a single devastating blow. But there was a problem. He couldn't. His strikes were fast, his movements precise, yet the girl kept slipping away, staying just out of reach. His pride burned with every failed attempt, but he refused to show weakness. He had to break her. Tuggear. Girl, on the other hand, wasn't thinking about power. She was thinking about strategy, about survival. She knew that if she fought like him, she'd lose. But if she could make him lose his composure, make him question his next move, then she might have a chance. It wasn't enough to simply survive anymore. She had to break him, mentally and physically. With a sudden burst of speed, she dashed toward him once more, this time making herself a blur of movement. The predator's eyes narrowed, expecting her to strike. But she didn't. Instead, she stopped just inches away from his massive form. The predator's reaction was instinctive. His arm shot out in a powerful swing, but the girl wasn't there. She had already shifted, her body moving just slightly to the left. The predator's strike missed, and in that instant she saw her opportunity. She stepped in close, using her body weight to her advantage. With a quick, calculated move, she struck at his lower ribs, pushing hard. The predator's breath caught in his throat, a sharp pain erupting where she had struck. He stumbled back, stunned not by the pain, but by the fact that she had done it. She had hit him in a spot he didn't expect. A flicker of frustration crossed his face, his pride wounded more than his body. He was the apex predator, the strongest in the arena, but she had just found a way to wound him, both physically and mentally. The crowd, once hesitant and unsure, erupted into cheers. For the first time in this fight, they weren't just watching a predator destroy an opponent. They were watching a battle of wits, a contest of who could outlast whom, and the human girl, small, seemingly powerless, was holding her ground. The predator's chest heaved as he regained his balance. He stared at the girl with new eyes, his cold, calculating gaze now laced with something he hadn't felt in a long time: uncertainty. This wasn't a fight he could win with sheer strength alone. This was no longer just about defeating an opponent. It was about proving that he was still the strongest, the most dominant. And that, he realized, was far more difficult than he had ever imagined. The girl stood there unwavering. She knew what this moment meant. The predator wasn't just physically strong, he was a symbol of power, an embodiment of fear and respect. If she could break him, she wouldn't just win the battle, she would change everything. The rules would never be the same again. And so, the fight continued, not just for survival, but for dominance. Every move was a test of strength, intelligence, and willpower. And in that moment, it was clear that neither of them would give up easily. The turning point. The fight had shifted. The apex predator, once a figure of invincible might, now found himself not just battling a human, he was battling his own pride. Every move the girl made chipped away at his confidence, pushing him further into uncharted territory. Her resistance, her agility, her cleverness, everything about her was an enigma he couldn't solve. For the first time in his life, the predator didn't feel like the hunter. He felt like the hunted. The crowd, who had once been certain of the predator's victory, now whispered among themselves. The air in the arena was thick with anticipation. The girl wasn't just surviving. She was making him fight harder than he ever had before. The predator's heart raced with frustration, his mind clouded with doubt. He tried to ignore it, tried to silence the voice inside his head that told him this wasn't supposed to be happening. But it was, and it was beginning to dawn on him that he might lose. The girl had a fire in her that he hadn't anticipated, a fire that seemed to burn brighter with every strike. She was pushing him, not with brute force, but with a mental clarity he could never match. As the predator lunged forward, expecting to land another crushing blow, the girl surprised him again. She didn't dodge this time. Instead, she stepped to the side, just out of reach, and thrust her hand into his chest. It wasn't a strike of raw power, but one of perfect timing and precision. Her fingers pressed into a spot beneath his armor, a vulnerable weak point he'd never thought anyone would be able to exploit. The predator froze. His breath caught in his throat. For the briefest moment, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. It wasn't the pain that stunned him. It was the realization that this human girl, this small, fragile being, had just found a way to hurt him in a way no one else ever had. He had been so focused on his strength, so wrapped up in the certainty of his power, that he had failed to notice the cracks in his own defense. The crowd gasped in disbelief, their eyes wide. This was it, the moment where everything changed. The apex predator was no longer invincible. The girl had found a way to break through his defenses, and with it, the tide of the battle had turned. She wasn't just outsmarting him. She was making him question everything he believed about himself. The predator staggered back, his mind racing. He had underestimated her, and now she was gaining the upper hand. But he wouldn't give up so easily. His pride, his very identity was on the line. The human girl had wounded him. Yes, but he wasn't done yet. He could still fight. He could still win. But there was something different in the air now. The predator had become desperate. His movements were wild, erratic, as if he was trying to claw his way back to control. But every time he struck, she dodged. Every time he attempted to overpower her, she found a way to make him pay. She was winning. And as the girl took another step forward, her face calm, her eyes unwavering, the predator knew. This fight was no longer about strength. It was about survival. And she had just shown him that sometimes the greatest power lay in the mind, not the body. The battle was shifting in her favor, and the predator could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The moment of reckoning was near. The throne. shaken. The arena had never felt so quiet. Even the roaring crowd seemed to hold its breath as though time itself had frozen. The apex predator, once the undisputed ruler of all, now stood on shaky ground. His every movement was calculated, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't regain control. The human girl was no longer just a survivor. She was a force, a storm that had entered his world and turned everything upside down. For the first time, the predator felt the weight of his own vulnerability. He could see the change in the girl's eyes. They weren't filled with fear anymore, nor were they the eyes of someone desperate for survival. No, now they reflected something much more dangerous: determination. She wasn't just trying to escape him. She was hunting him like a skilled predator who had learned the ways of the hunter. The predator had lost the comfort of his dominance, and that discomfort stirred something deep within him, something primal, something ancient. Anger. He charged again, furious, hoping that sheer force would break her. His massive arms swiped through the air like crashing waves, each strike a thunderous attempt to overpower her. But the girl was no longer just dodging. She was anticipating. She knew his every move before he even made it. And with each failed strike, she grew bolder, moving closer to him with precision. She darted in quicker than he expected, and this time, she wasn't just landing small blows. No, she aimed for his most vulnerable points. The gaps in his armor, the areas he had grown too comfortable to defend. Her fists struck like sharp, calculated blades, and with every punch, the predator's confidence chipped away. His heart pounded in his chest. He was the apex predator. He had ruled this arena for as long as anyone could remember. And yet, in these moments, the girl seemed to take his throne from him, piece by piece, with every calculated move. How could this be? How could this fragile human, so small and insignificant in comparison, take control so easily? In a sudden, unexpected move, the girl lunged forward. The predator tried to block her, but she was faster. She ducked under his arm, using his own weight against him. The girl's body twisted with grace, and in one swift motion she delivered a final, powerful strike to his side. The impact was so intense, it knocked the wind from him. The predator staggered back, his knees wobbling for a brief moment. His pride screamed at him to push forward, but his body betrayed him. He was exhausted, and that was it. The final crack in his facade. The predator collapsed to one knee, his body trembling as he fought to regain his balance. The crowd's silence was deafening. No one had ever seen the apex predator so vulnerable, so close to defeat. He had always been the one in control, the one who determined the outcome of every battle. But now the girl stood over him, calm, collected, and undeniably victorious. She looked down at him not with triumph, but with something much more unsettling: pity. She had beaten him, but in that moment, she realized that her victory wasn't just physical. It was a conquest of the mind, of the spirit. She had taken something from him that no one ever had before: his invincibility. The predator's eyes locked with hers, and in that brief moment of recognition, the weight of his defeat settled in. He wasn't just losing a fight. He was losing his throne. The girl had done what no one ever thought possible. She had dethroned him. The predator struggled to stand, but it was clear now that the fight was over. The battle for dominance had shifted entirely. The human girl had not only survived, she had taken his throne before he even hit the ground. The arena was hers now, and with it, a new era had begun. And as the girl stood tall, ready to claim her victory, the predator knew one undeniable truth. This wasn't just the end of his reign. It was the beginning of something much more dangerous: the human girl's triumph. The air in the arena was thick with disbelief. The apex predator, the living embodiment of power and terror, lay defeated on the ground. He had fought with everything he had, yet it wasn't enough. The human girl, small and seemingly powerless, stood victorious before him, her chest rising and falling with each breath as she surveyed her conquered foe. But this wasn't just a physical victory. It was something deeper, something that had shaken the very foundations of power. The girl had shown that strength alone wasn't enough to rule the world. Intelligence, strategy, and willpower were just as potent. She had outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him at every turn, and now she stood on the precipice of something unimaginable. Leadership. As the predator struggled to push himself off the ground, his body weakened by the fight, the girl remained still, her posture regal. She didn't gloat, didn't shout in triumph. Her victory wasn't something she needed to announce, it was clear for all to see. She had earned it through every move, every calculated strike, every moment of hesitation she had forced him to experience. She had become the apex, the one who held the power, the one who controlled the arena now. The crowd watched in stunned silence. They had seen battles, they had witnessed countless victories, but this was different. They had never witnessed the downfall of the unchallenged. Ruler of this world, the predator, the one they had feared, was now at her mercy. And yet, she did not strike him down in vengeance. She simply stood there, her gaze unwavering, commanding the respect she had earned. The predator, now kneeling, looked up at her. His eyes, once filled with arrogance and dominance, were now shadowed with something new. Fear. Fear of the unknown, of the possibility that he had been bested by a human. Fear of what would happen to him, and his reign, now that she had taken his place. The girl's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the authority in her eyes. She had won, but she wasn't the same as the predator who had ruled before her. She understood the weight of power and the responsibility it carried. She wasn't interested in cruelty or domination. She had seen the damage it did to the predator, and she would not follow the same path. Instead, she extended her hand to him. Not as an enemy, but as a leader offering something different, something the predator had never given. Mercy. The crowd gasped once more. They had expected her to strike, to finish what she had started, but instead she was offering him the opportunity to live. The predator stared at her hand for a long moment. His pride, his very nature, urged him to resist, to refuse her mercy. But he knew, deep down, that he had been defeated, not just in body but in spirit. With a grunt, he took her hand, lifting himself from the ground. As he stood, the girl stepped back, giving him space. She wasn't going to force him into submission. This was his choice now. The arena, once his kingdom, was now hers. The girl turned to face the crowd, and a murmur rippled through the masses. They were watching the dawn of a new era. The predator had been dethroned, but this girl, this human, was not a tyrant. She would rule with wisdom, with respect, and with the understanding that true strength lay not in crushing others, but in rising above them. The predator stood beside her, his face still etched with disbelief. But for the first time in his life, there was no fight left in him. He wasn't defeated by force, he was defeated by the human girl's conviction. And in that moment he knew that she would make a better ruler than he ever could. The girl's reign had begun, not with bloodshed or fear, but with the quiet, powerful acknowledgement that even the mightiest can fall. And as she looked out at the crowd, her gaze steady and unflinching, she knew this was only the beginning. The world would change under her rule, and it would be a change for the better. A new dawn had arrived. The throne is hers. The atmosphere in the arena was electric, but it was not the kind of excitement one might expect from a battle's end. This was not a celebration of victory born from raw power, but the quiet understanding of something far deeper. The human girl had claimed more than just the title of victor. She had claimed the future. The apex predator, now standing beside her, no longer towered over anyone. His immense frame, once the symbol of terror, felt almost fragile now, standing in the shadow of the girl who had dismantled his reign with intelligence, strategy, and sheer will. His world had crumbled around him, and he could do nothing but watch as she assumed control, her gaze unwavering, her presence commanding. She turned toward the center of the arena, the place where once the predator had stood victorious. His posture, filled with arrogance and dominance, but now it was her turn. Her body was poised, regal, the weight of leadership settling upon her shoulders like a mantle that had never been truly earned before. The crowd, once in awe of the predator, now found themselves drawn to her, unsure of what kind of ruler she would be, but certain that she would be one who would change everything. As the girl ascended to the platform where the predator's throne once stood, she did not sit immediately. Instead, she stood at the edge, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, taking in the faces that once feared the predator, the ones who had looked at him with reverence, with terror. Now, they looked to her, waiting for her next move. They were not just watching a ruler. They were watching the birth of a new era, one that would be defined by her not by violence or dominance, but by something else, leadership through choice. The girl's eyes softened for a moment. She was not here to prove anything. She did not need to. The battle had been won and she had earned the throne. But she wasn't just going to sit on it and expect obedience. She had seen the consequences of unchecked power, the devastation it caused. She knew that true leadership didn't come from fear. It came from respect, from understanding the people who followed you, from showing them that their well-being mattered more than your own thirst for control. Her voice rang out across the arena, clear and commanding but not harsh. This arena, this world, does not need a tyrant. It needs a leader who listens, who fights not just for strength, but for the future. I will not rule with fear but with strength of purpose. Together we will rebuild not as conquerors but as allies. The predator, standing at the base of the platform, looked up at her with a mixture of disbelief and something else. Regret. Regret for his own choices, for the years he had spent ruling with iron fists. And in that moment something shifted within him. He had fallen, yes, but in the girl's words he saw the possibility of redemption, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been swept up in the cycle of violence. The girl turned to him, meeting his gaze, and with a small nod, acknowledged the unspoken understanding between them. He wasn't her enemy anymore. The battle for the throne was over, and now it was time to move forward. With one final look at the crowd, the girl slowly lowered herself onto the throne, but not with the air of a conqueror. She sat as though she were among equals, her hands resting on the armrests with confidence but without arrogance. The crown of the arena was hers, but she would wear it differently. She was not a queen of subjugation, but a ruler who had fought to earn the respect of the people, not their fear. As she sat, the predator, once the supreme ruler, turned and walked away. No longer the king, but a witness to something more powerful than domination. The rise of a new kind of leadership, one that had been forged in the fires of battle and tempered by wisdom. And as the arena fell silent, the girl's reign began, not with a proclamation of victory, but with a quiet promise that change had come, and the world would never be the same again. The throne was hers, but it was not the throne of a tyrant. It was the throne of a leader. And the world had just entered a new era,